If you so much as think about manipulating next-gen parts, NASCAR's ready to drive you into the ground. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. A couple big stories to hit on today. First, as of the time I'm recording this, NASCAR teams are in the middle of the first of a 2-day Phoenix Raceway Next Gen test. This is the final Next Gen test before the season gets kicked off, first with the Busch Clash at the Coliseum. We're less than 2 weeks away from the Clash, y'all. It's gonna be here before we know it. We've got some other stories to talk about today Firstly, and I just want to briefly mention this, but Bob Pockrass tweeted out earlier today that he expects 36 car fields for the Truck and Xfinity series, same as last year. But he then followed that tweet up with new information he apparently received, saying, "After I did my last tweet, I heard from some people in the Xfinity garage expecting Xfinity field to expand to 38. Rulebook hasn't been updated yet with that info." That's not too surprising. I mean, we've mentioned only briefly on this show, but at least as far as the season opener at Daytona is concerned, there is a very real possibility we could have close to 50 cars on the Xfinity entry list. I don't expect that high of a number for other races this Xfinity season, but still, it shows there's a clear demand. There are a lot of teams that want to get their feet wet, want to compete in the NASCAR Xfinity Series right now, and NASCAR, it sounds like at least, will amend their rulebook to allow a couple extra entries per race. Now, why is this happening? Why is there a sudden influx of Xfinity Series entries? It can largely be chalked up to what's happening in the Cup Series. A lot of Xfinity teams get little parts and pieces as sort of hand-me-downs from Cup Series teams, and with the Cup Series abandoning the Gen 6 altogether, going to an all-new spec chassis, if I had to guess, it's easier for many Xfinity Series teams to get the parts and pieces they need to run an Xfinity car. So if I had to guess, in the short term at least, over the next couple of years, it'll probably be easier to field an Xfinity car than it has been in recent years, which is why we're seeing so much new interest. But as time goes on, I do anticipate it once again being a little harder to field Xfinity cars, so I don't think we'll see huge field sizes for too long, which is why I don't think NASCAR's jumping it up to like 40. They're not going to add 40 cars to the Xfinity entry. This for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to have to divide up the purse money an extra couple of times. A lot of existing teams probably won't like that. But two, NASCAR can also probably see the writing on the wall that we won't have a huge influx of Xfinity Series teams every single year. In the next few years, there's a good chance we'll find ourselves back in that 36 car field range once again. But I thought that was an interesting detail. It sure sounds like NASCAR is preparing to announce a slightly expanded Xfinity Series fields for this year. 38 car fields. I think that'll certainly come in handy at Daytona. Again, can we move the dual races to the Xfinity Series just for this 1 year? As long as we're just making things up, going to the LA Coliseum, Bristol Dirt, like, can we just make this up as well for 1 year? Anyway, the big thing I want to talk about today is a rule that NASCAR has officially announced, has made public, has cemented into the rule book, carved in stone. Yesterday, NASCAR revealed a new tiered penalty system regarding next-gen parts and pieces. To sum things up, NASCAR is taking any next-gen modifications very seriously. Which isn't a huge surprise. It's a spec car. Everyone's supposed to get the exact same thing, but it is a bit jarring to look at some of these numbers. So let's look at this new tiered penalty system. First, we have the L1 penalties, which are the least severe penalties, and violations include post-race failure to meet minimum weight requirements, the team's source parts not meeting the NASCAR rules but not rising to a higher level penalty, and failures in the submission and approval process of parts. Penalty options that NASCAR has the right to exercise include a points deduction of 20 to 75 points, a playoff point deduction, which is new, anywhere from 1 to 10 playoff points, a 1 to 3 race suspension for a crew member, and fines ranging from $25,000 to $100,000. And we're still talking about the L1 penalty tier. Those are huge fines. The addition of potential playoff point deductions is also new. That could affect a team severely in the regular season and through the playoffs as each round resets. NASCAR's not playing any games here. Let's look at the L2 penalty system, the middle tier. Violations include modifications to single-source next-gen parts, not rising to an L3 level infraction, which we'll talk about in a moment, violations of engine seal requirements, unapproved alterations to the engine control system wiring, and the use of unapproved onboard electronics. So if you're really getting creative, you're really trying to mess around, you have the potential of facing some hefty penalties that include a 75 to 120 point deduction, a 10 to 25 playoff point deduction, the suspension of 1 to 2 crew members for 4 to 6 races, and or a fine ranging from $100,000 to $250,000, $250,000. Oh my goodness, I'm almost afraid to look at the next gen car with these potential penalties hanging over my head. Let's look at the L3, the most severe level of penalties. L3 violations include counterfeiting or modifying single source next gen parts, any engine infractions and performance enhancements, ECU or electric fuel injection violations, modifying tires and or fuel, so no rocket fuel, and violations of the private team testing policy. Boy, if you get caught doing one of these things, may Steve Phelps have mercy on your soul. For an L3 infraction, you could face anywhere from 120 to 180 point deduction. We're talking about, that's more than like 3 or 4 full races worth of points, even if you include stages. Yeah, that's 3 full races that you both win and sweep all the stages, and that's insane. Playoff point deductions ranging from 25 to 50 points. Suspension of crew members for up to 6 races, a $250,000 to $500,000 potential fine. Your postseason eligibility could be completely nullified regardless of how many wins or playoff points you've accumulated. And if you have the stones to commit multiple L3 level infractions, your whole race team could face a 1 race suspension. The Steves NASCAR, they are not holding back. They are making it abundantly clear. If you skirt the rulebook in any notable way, NASCAR will bring hellfire upon your race team. They're taking this extremely seriously, which with a spec chassis, you kind of have to. NASCAR's made it repeatedly clear that they want races to be won out on the racetrack and not in the wind tunnel, so to speak. NASCAR VP Steve O'Donnell said in a statement, "It used to be, let's see what we can get away with and go racing. That's not the case with this car. We've built this car to try and make it as fundamentally sound as possible in collaboration with the teams, and then really put it on the teams, the drivers, and pit crews to go out there and win races." Scott Miller said, "If there aren't penalties for altering parts and pieces on the new car, then the business model with the new car won't work." So it was definitely something that was pressed for hard by the teams, and we're doing our due diligence for establishing all the inspection procedures and all the different things. The rulebook is a completely new rulebook with lots more specifics than there were in the past. I want to focus on that first quote from Steve O'Donnell where he says, "It used to be, let's see what we can get away with and go racing." That's not the case with this car. That summarizes the next gen car, and that highlights, I think, one of the negatives of the next gen car in some ways. It's positive in one regard. With a spec car, with every team getting the same basic chassis, as I've said repeatedly on this show, Joe Gibbs Racing is getting the same equipment as Spire. Well, the same car at least. They all have their own people working on the cars, obviously their own drivers, their own engines coming from their own manufacturers. But the positive in that, perhaps, is that the costs will be going down because the costs are now in many ways controlled, and there will be perhaps some more parity on the racetrack. Spire may be a little better this year than they have been in years past. Joe Gibbs Racing is not going to have as huge of an advantage over the Rick Wares and the Richard Pettys of the world. That advantage may shrink a bit. That's at least what many people are expecting, speculating. You can say that's a positive. I think for fans watching at home, they want to see everyone have a chance to win. They don't want to see just the teams that are willing to spend the most go out and dominate week in, week out. Like, that's not great for TV at the very least. So there is some positives here, but the big negative is the loss of innovation, or at least a lot of it. I'm not going to say all of it because teams will certainly surprise me, and I'm sure people will find things out. Very smart people will learn new things with this new car, but we've certainly strayed far from NASCAR's humble beginnings. Back in the old bootlegging days, drivers would outfit their cars with special shocks. They would come up with innovative new ways to improve their engines so they can outrun the police. That was the foundation in many ways that NASCAR, as we know it today, was built upon. And even in recent years, despite the tighter box that NASCAR puts the teams in every single year, a very strict rule book, very strict allowances and qualifications teams need to meet, teams have still been building their own cars from the ground up, and naturally that leaves some room open to interpretation, gives some teams the opportunities to innovate. Teams with the biggest budgets and the smartest people could often find new little sneaky things to gain speed. I mean, that's one of the great charming things about NASCAR throughout its history that was still around even just a few years ago. A lot of that is gone with the next gen car. A lot of teams have downsized a little bit. Now the focus, as Steve O'Donnell said in that quote, is put on Sunday, is what happens on the racetrack. How does the pit crew perform? How do the crew chief and driver collaborate to make the car better in the moment, tighten it up, loosen it up, etc., etc.? The focus is now put on race day, which in some ways I think is going to be great. The drivers, the crew, those are the stars of the sport. It's great to let them shine. But behind the scenes, we've lost out on some of that great creativity that I think many longtime NASCAR fans will find themselves longing for this season. I'm still very excited about the next gen car, and while again it's a shame we're maybe losing out on some of these competitive elements, I'd argue the next gen car was absolutely necessary to help keep the industry afloat, help the industry thrive. Like NASCAR, or the business model at least, to run a NASCAR Cup Series team was not sustainable in its previous form. With the next gen car, I think there's a much greater chance that it will be. So in some ways it's a shame that we're losing out on that creativity behind the scenes, or at least some of it, but in other ways, in other regards, it was probably necessary. And at least on Sundays, I think it will lead to a more interesting show. And it will put the competition in the driver's hands more so than I think previously. With everyone now in slightly more equal equipment, I think the best drivers will shine more than necessarily the best equipment, at least not as consistently. Drivers are the stars, it's their names on fans' t-shirts. I don't see a problem with putting the emphasis on Sunday, but it is worth at least mentioning some of what we might be losing here with this new car. So NASCAR's new rules are very, very strict, or not necessarily strict. In many cases, they're very black and white, which is good, but the penalties are very hefty. If you do step over that line, if you do throw out the rule book, NASCAR will drop the hammer on you, which they need to do to keep costs under control, to keep competition closer. With a spec car, it's what needed to be done. So not surprising to hear this new announcement, but boy, some of those numbers in those tiered penalties are staggering, to say the least. But that's all I wanted to talk about here today. Leave your thoughts down below about the next gen car. Of course, they're testing right now at Phoenix. NASCAR's YouTube channel is streaming the test today, and I guess they'll stream it tomorrow as well. So it'll be fun to follow along during the workday. But leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. I look forward to reading them. That's gonna do it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR news, notes, predictions, rumors, and much, much more nearly every single day here on Out of the Groove. And as always, a big thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. I've got some big things planned for 2022. Wouldn't be possible without your tremendous support. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all again very, very soon. Have a fantastic rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you in the next video.